Back when I first decided to buy the Sony FX3, I knew I wanted to have a small minimal kit to basically use in every single scenario that I find myself in. I knew I didn't want to start out with a kit of primes or a kit of zooms. Couldn't really afford that, so I wanted to be able to find one lens that had high image quality and could basically do it all. So that essentially means I needed a zoom. And on the market, there's so many different zooms that you can use and so many different focal lengths, and I eventually narrowed it down to what I think is the best all-around lens for Sony cameras, and that is the Sigma Art 24-70 f2.8, and it is stunning. The design of this lens is gorgeous. These Sigma Art lenses are truly high quality and very special. It has an all-metal build. It's a little hefty and it's a little big, but it feels so sturdy and so well built. This lens uses high-quality glass, and though it's a zoom, it gives you sharpness like a prime lens would. And for $1,100, I think it's a pretty great deal. On the lens, it features a zoom ring, a focus ring, an AF and MF switch, a locking mechanism so your barrel doesn't fully extend while you're walking around with it, and it also features an AFL button that you can customize to basically do whatever you want. The design of this lens is so high quality. I haven't had it barrel creep at all like other low quality zoom lenses do. And Sigma also updated this design to include a rubber gasket on the lens mount, which basically makes it dust and splash resistant, which was a pretty big problem for a lot of the old Sigma lenses. So rest assured, these lenses are going to be fine from dust. So going back to the size and weight of this lens is definitely hefty, but the weight isn't too bad. It weighs 1.84 pounds, which I think is lighter than the Sony GM 24-70. And on the Sony FX3, when you have it fully built out, the weight feels pretty natural, but when you have it stripped down, it can get a little front heavy, but adding weight to your camera can definitely smoothen out those micro jitters. So that's definitely a bonus of this lens. It's a little bit heftier than most of the primes or the smaller zooms that you find on the market, but because it uses high quality glass, it definitely brings in a lot of weight. The focal range of this lens is pretty much perfect for everyday shooting. 24-70 is as wide as you'd probably need to go and tight enough. It's definitely not tight like an 85, but 70 is pretty solid for most run and gun filmmakers. And with the 24-70 range, it basically pairs in 4 primes in one. You have a 24, 35, 50, and a 70, and all the focal lengths in between all those numbers. I don't think I've ever shot with a zoom lens before that felt like I had a 24, 35, 50, and 70 prime built into one. Most zooms usually kind of feel a little soft and not as sharp as primes, but this Sigma Art lens is definitely special. This lens also features a constant f2.8 aperture, which is pretty much as low as you would need to go. Most of the times I'm stopping down to 3.5, 5.6, maybe f8 for landscape. So 2.8 I've never really had issues with. And when I'm shooting in low light, 2.8 is still plenty. Most of the times I'm shooting at 640 ISO, but the times I need a little bit more light, bump it up to 12,800, which is the second base ISO on the Sony FX3. And most of the new Sonys have dual base ISO anyways, and they're usually incredible in low light. So 2.8 isn't really the end of the world for low light, and you don't really need to shoot wide open all the time. The focusing of this lens is pretty much identical to the Sony lenses that I've used. The autofocus never misses. I use face tracking on this, and I use it for talking heads like this, for interviews, run and gun shooting, and the autofocus is superb. Right now I have like a little box in my eye right here, and it is tracking me. I've never had any issues with the autofocus missing, and with manual focusing, the focus ring is really smooth. I like to shoot some stuff in autofocus and some stuff in manual focus, so I don't feel like I'm tied down to one or the other. It definitely has the best of both worlds with this lens. And then the main thing you'll probably notice with this lens is the image quality. This lens is so sharp, it barely flares, it has gorgeous colors, it's sharp edge to edge, and I've never had any issues with wanting more image quality. Oftentimes it's a little too clinical for my liking, but for most scenarios, for YouTube, for corporate stuff, for interviews, anything where you want high image quality for a good price, this lens definitely is going to be something that I choose. And one thing I noticed with this lens is the bokeh. Not like the bokeh balls you get from lights, but the texture you get in the background. It's really painterly and swirly, and it really reminds me of my Contax Zeiss vintage lenses. So that's definitely a unique characteristic that I found in this lens. I don't think I've ever really noticed that in any other modern lens. So this is a little vlog test of the Sigma 24-70. We are at 24 with active stabilization off, so there's no crop, no nothing. It's kind of wide, holding it far out. It's a little heavy. I couldn't imagine doing this all day, but yeah, I feel like for vlogging, you'd probably want a 20mm Sony. It's a little bit wider and it gives you more of the environment in your frame, but 24 isn't too bad. So yeah, I don't really vlog, but there it is for you. And I really enjoyed that the native filter thread size is 82 millimeters. All of my filters are 82 millimeters, so I don't need to use step-up rings, and I'm able to use my filters with the lens hood on it, which is pretty nice when it's really sunny. It can help block out some of the sunlight to prevent flares. But for filters, I always use a 1.8 black pro mist. It helps kind of bring down the quality a bit and bloom the highlights and soften skin tones, so that always lives on this lens because this lens is definitely really sharp, but for video, I kind of want to have a little bit of softness to it. And that black pro mist has front threads on it, so I just screw my NDs on top of it. Going back to the dust, I've had zero issues with dust getting in this lens. I've brought it out to Death Valley, to the beach, in heavy winds. One of the first times I went to Death Valley with this camera, we had crazy wind and my camera was just getting super dusty. I kept wiping it off. I was a little worried that I was gonna get dust in the lens and in the sensor, but to my surprise, no dust got in. So I'm super confident that I could take it anywhere and not have any dust issues. So when do I use this lens? I use it for a whole variety of scenarios. I've brought it on shoots with Sam. I've brought it on little travel trips. I use it for YouTube. I use it for social ads for brands. I use it for so many different things, and that's the great thing about this lens. This lens is extremely versatile, and when I'm out run and gun filmmaking, being able to have one lens that covers a whole range is super convenient, and it saves a lot of time, and I'm able to get a lot more shots than I would if I had to switch throughout primes. 24 is as wide as I usually like to go. It'd be nice to get a little bit wider for like YouTube stuff, and 70 is pretty tight, but oftentimes when I'm shooting landscapes or establishing shots, an 85 would probably fit a lot nicer. But when I don't really have much time and I'm out just trying to capture as much as I can, I'm definitely going to reach for this lens more often than not. But when I have a more controlled shoot and I'm able to move things around and take more time, I'll probably reach for primes. But for quick social stuff where I'm not too worried about having like an artistic look, this lens definitely crushes it. So for the dislikes, I really don't have any dislikes about this lens. It's a beautiful, amazing lens. And for $1,100, I really have no complaints. But there are definitely two things that have kind of made me think about when I would leave this lens at home. It's super sharp and it can kind of get a little boring, but I'm not gonna get rid of this lens because of that. I use it for so many different things and it fits those scenarios really well. But if I want something a little bit more soft and more creative and a little funkier, I'm gonna reach for a different lens, mostly a vintage lens. And for the size and weight, it's a cost that's worth having because of how sharp this lens is and the focal range. But if I want something super small, I'm not gonna bring this lens. It's really nothing against the lens, it's just the nature of something so high quality and so well built. It's just big and heavy. If you want something really small, just get a different lens that you can bring around. But for having a lens that could do it all, I feel like those dislikes don't really count against this lens. So if you're out doing research for the best all-around lens for the Sony cameras and you want to look at other options, here's some other lenses that I considered. I consider the Tamron 28-75, and I usually tend to stay away from Tamron. They feel plasticky and the image quality is pretty soft from my experience. Could be different with most of these lenses, but the 28 is definitely a little too tight to have on the wide end, and 75 is a nice additional bonus to the common 24-70. Another is the Sigma 28-70 contemporary lens. It's also the same thing. 28's a little too tight, but this lens is also, I think, half the size and quite a bit lighter. So if you want a travel option that can do it all, it's definitely a solid option. It still has great image quality. I use this lens in tandem with my Sigma Art 24-70, and for the most part, I couldn't really tell a difference between the two, so that's a pretty good sign. I did consider getting this lens at one point, but I figured having the Sigma Art 24-70 was a better option for me. Another option is the legendary Sony 24-105 f4 OSS. This lens is perfect at the wide end with 24, and it extends even farther to 105, which in this lens was definitely the best option years ago when these cameras didn't have IBIS. But now these cameras have IBIS, and you really don't need to have OSS anymore. And yeah, this lens is 24-105, but it's also f4. So if you're willing to lose a little bit of light, this lens could be a good option for you, but I feel the Sigma 24-70 is definitely better than this lens. And then the holy grail, the Sony GM 24-70. This lens is legendary. Pretty much every YouTuber talks about this lens, but it's also $2,200 and quite a bit heavier than a lot of the other options. As some of you may know, when I was on my whole camera journey, I rented the Sony FX3 and that GM 24-70. And I wasn't really impressed with that lens. Yeah, it was really sharp, it was nice. It just didn't feel like a $2,200 lens. So when I ended up making the decision to buy my Sony FX3, I wasn't really sold on that GM lens. I was looking at all the different lenses on the market, and I ultimately decided on the Sigma 24-70, and I love this lens. It fits my workflow perfectly. Whenever I'm out shooting run and gun and I need to have a versatile lens, I always choose this lens. It fits a whole variety of my workflows, and I could see it being a lens that I'd choose more often than not. To be honest, I got a little bit bored with it a couple months ago, and I thought about selling it and just going full vintage lenses, but I'm glad that I didn't sell it. I've been really starting to learn to love it again because of how versatile and easy it is to use. But the times where I want to have like a nice vintage look or a smaller kit, I'll just go for my Contax lenses because they're smaller, but swapping filters and lenses definitely gets old and it takes more time, but I feel like having those options depending on the project is a good thing to have. But if I had to pick one lens to do it all for literally everything, it would definitely be this lens. So who should buy this lens? I think anybody who doesn't already have a 24-70. The 24-70 fits into literally every workflow so well. Wedding filmmakers, vloggers, content creators, people doing social ads, interviews, YouTube. So many different workflows can benefit from owning a 24-70, and this lens really makes filmmaking so much easier because of how sharp it is. It feels like you're carrying 4 prime lenses around, which is pretty uncommon with a lot of the lenses on the market. For filmmakers who are looking for the best all-around lens, that one lens to do it all, the Sigma Art 24-70 is pretty hard to beat. Leave a comment down below if you've used this lens, if you're looking into it, if you have any questions about it. I truly think this lens is the best all-around lens for Sony cameras, and for $1,100, it's really hard to beat. So with all that, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Take it easy. Peace.